So I'd just like to give you guys a little bit of background about Tammy, our speaker this evening. So Tammy Harrington is a printmaker and paper cut artist that imbues the cross-cultural influences of Chinese and American culture into figurative compositions to create an ephemeral space in a place between reality and the mystical. She was born in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and currently resides in Russellville, Arkansas. She received a BFA in printmaking from the University of South Dakota and an MFA in printmaking from Wichita State University. Harrington is currently a professor of art at the University of Ozarks, where she received the Bagwell Outstanding Faculty Award in 2013 and 2018. She has exhibited artwork throughout the region and nationally. She serves as the president of the Arkansas Society of Printmakers and was awarded the 2017 Beaux Arts Award from the River Valley Art Center. Also, she was our juror for the adult jury competition 2 years ago? Last year, yes. So please help me welcome Tammy Harrington.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Sit up here. So I'll be talking about my artwork, and if you haven't noticed as I go through it, they're all images of me. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's just something that I've always just been attracted to. So art making gave me the ability to learn about my identity in profound and meaningful ways. These revelations came at different times in my life. These moments of clarity and awareness were usually unexpected, and the messages were surprising at times. And usually I'm not thinking about that when I'm making the art. Sometimes it happens after I make the art. Sometimes I'm just thinking about my experiences, and so I'll talk about that as we get through this lecture. I will cover my artwork that started in graduate school. So that was a long time ago. That was back in the late 90s, up until what my work looks like now. I currently have an exhibition of a solo show in Pine Bluff. So here's the map of the United States. This is where we're at. This is where South Dakota is. And so it's interesting when I talk about South Dakota, especially to students, because I'll ask them, where is South Dakota? And some of them are like, I am not sure where that is at. Although I'm sure you all are aware of it, but just here's a map in case you want a refresher on that. So I was born in South Dakota and lived there for 24 years until I moved away to attend graduate school. So really, in my heart, I still consider myself a South Dakota. Even though I've almost lived in Arkansas almost as much. I think I'm 24 years in South Dakota and I'm year 21 in Arkansas. So if things all continue well, I won't be living in Arkansas much longer. But I feel like it's home, obviously, if it's a place that you were born and raised. When people ask me where I'm from, I'll automatically say I'm from South Dakota. And sometimes I'll go like, well, they're asking me because I don't have a southern accent, or I don't necessarily sound like what people from this area sound like. But sometimes it takes me a while to realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're not necessarily asking me where I'm from in the sense of my hometown, or maybe where I'm from because of my Asian appearance. Like, so really, they're just asking the question of where are your people from? You know, what is your ethnic background or your heritage? Which I think is a fair question because it's something that is that people are curious about. So in terms of my ethnicity, I am of Chinese heritage, although I was born in South Dakota. So it's a mixed bag of starting the journey and wondering who am I, or how much of my physical appearance ties in with my experience as how I live. So a little bit more background. So this is me right here. And this is my two sisters and I. Well, actually, my sisters were just visiting because my son was graduating high school. So it was nice to have all of us together again. But there's me, there's my little sister Mary, and then the oldest sister, Julie. I was the baby. And you can see this is South Dakota because we got snow. You have snow down here too, but it's not necessarily the nice fluffy snow. It's sometimes that really yucky, icy kind of snow. So my parents were immigrants from Hong Kong. So they were married, and about 2 years into their marriage, immigrated to the United States. They joined family that was here. So my father had a sister that ended up in South Dakota. So hence, that's why I'm in South Dakota. Because normally, if you're talking about immigration from Asian countries, from China, you're going to hit the East Coast, like New York, or you're going to hit San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chinatown, maybe even Seattle. But because I had a aunt that settled down with someone who actually had, I think they were stationed or somehow connected to Rochester, Minnesota, and then that's how we ended up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So it's an interesting kind of arrangement of where we're coming from. And I think another interesting thing is, you can notice my name is Tammy Harrington. That's not really a very Chinese sounding name at all. Although my original name, before I got married to my lovely husband, Neil, was Tammy, so my last name was Y. So like very short. So now my name is Harrington, which is very long, which is like 10 letters. My parents wanted, I guess, us to fit in a little bit more. So they would ask my cousins who were younger to think of, well, what name should I name my child? And so my oldest sister is Julie Ann. My middle sister is Mary Jane, and then I am Tammy Lynn. So Tammy Lynn. So it's a very Americanized name. I think they were just trying to get a connection to where we were living, maybe some kind of acclamation. I do have a Chinese name, it's YN, but no one ever calls me that. And that's something of awareness. And so there's kind of that dichotomy too, right? Where I have, there's this Chinese side of me, but then there's this, Tammy is my identity. And then if you are not familiar with South Dakota, I will tell you it is not the hotbed of Chinese culture, especially in the 1970s. So I grew up in a very predominantly Caucasian world. And so I don't necessarily feel like I'm uncomfortable with that, but it's just something that I am perhaps used to. So I grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's a town, probably at that time about 60,000 to 80,000 people, so it was a fairly big city. But I also was, Chinese or Asian was not the biggest minority population in that area. So typically it's going to be the Lakota Sioux in South Dakota. But then, even then, it was not very mixed in terms of different ethnicities, just because you also have the reservation system and what happened with the Native Americans. So it was still very much more Caucasian. But I was comfortable with it, so it wasn't like anything that was any different. But even with the size of the city, in my elementary school, we had several of them. I was usually like the Asian kid in the class. Like every grade had the Asian kid, and I was like the Asian kid in the class. So it was a distinction that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it also was an awareness of how similarities and differences in terms of growing up. And then, when you're a kid, you just want to fit in. You just want to fit in with everyone else. And so it's a mixed bag. And you can also see, like, in terms of my being Chinese, I don't necessarily have any kind of accent, except for maybe a South Dakota accent. In South Dakota, you kind of hear that, which is different, which is kind of that Fargo, northern Midwest accent. But I spoke fluent English, and really, my physical appearance was the only thing that really stood out. And even growing up during the 80s, it wasn't so much about your physical appearance, but it was really like, what kind of clothes did you wear, where did you live, and what kind of stuff did you own? Because I think that there was more status and symbols happening at the time. But then also kids are just kids, and they're just not really concerned about that so much. So a little bit more background. So this is some pictures of my family. And so you can tell I lived in, it was the 70s. So we lived at that time, right? Because you got the, check out that couch, right? And in fact, the house we moved into after this had the green shag rug and the wood paneling on the walls. And so that's some good stuff. But you can see that I have my sisters and then I even live with my grandmother right here, my dad's mom, my nanny. And so it's like I lived two different worlds. So I had the Americanized world and the Chinese world. So the first thing I'll talk about is my Chinese world, where inside the bubble of the household, it was, most people spoke Chinese. In fact, my grandmother only spoke Chinese, so she didn't have any English. So we had to interact with her in terms of growing up in this little bubble. I would eat rice every day. I had chopsticks with my name engraved in them. We would use spoons, forks, and knives, but sometimes to eat. But we had lots of very Chinese food and had that kind of existence. But yet, if you take a look at this television right here, that 70s big console, parts of the American world would start sneaking in, right? Because once I left the confines of the home, or once you turn on the television, I'm watching Sesame Street. I'm watching The Love Boat, I'm watching whatever Incredible Hulk, anything that's on the television. And so it was Chineseness, but with little bits of American coming in. When I think back on living in here, I remember the little knickknacks that we had, which I think starts feeding into what I start thinking about with how to depict Chineseness in my artwork. So I always remember having this little lantern that sometimes we turn on and we got the Chinese characters, the satin pillows, and these little different knickknacks and chopsticks that we would have. And so that was kind of the balancing of the two. And you can also tell my clothing is not very Chinese at all. So very 70s clothing, and even my parents, we didn't necessarily dress up in anything, because we were just trying to blend in with American culture. So when I moved on to college, so this is one of my pieces that I created in undergraduate school. And it's a little bit of a departure for me, because previous to this, I was making a lot of artwork that was maybe next to my identity, that was tied into like being a woman, or identity as a human in the world, but I also would like to draw animals or insects. So it was kind of more of a mixed bag, maybe some social commentary. Of course, at that time, it was just hard to really kind of focus on anything in particular with my artwork. But typically, it would be figurative work. When I did create a self-portrait, it was usually in a traditional Western or European American style. This was the first time I moved away from home. When I went to college, it was only an hour away, so I went home every weekend to work and then see my family. Now that I had moved from South Dakota to Kansas, it was like I can't just hop home a little bit to visit my family. So it was different, plus I was really married to my husband, so it was a lot of different changes at the time. So I created this that communicated my feelings about moving away from home. So different state of mind, right? So you're different state of mind mentally, but also physically in different states, from South Dakota to Kansas. And then, of course, if you have ever been to Kansas, there are some tornadoes in terms of the chaos. So the mental chaos in my mind, but then also the chaos of the space. Although we did have a tornado that first year, we were living in Kansas, so it was interesting. But what I like about this is using the idea of symbols to represent my feelings of who I am, and not so much of a literal depiction of who I am. Because that is my profile, but you don't necessarily see the details of the eyes and nose and mouth. Not necessarily knowing that this is me. Plus it mixes in printmaking, which is my background. Although I do like to draw realistically, in charcoal. So this is a large charcoal drawing. And I did a series where I would focus on different parts of my head or different parts of my body to look at understanding maybe my physical representation. And what I thought was interesting about myself is when I was growing up, I would draw a lot of people, but they would probably look more Caucasian than what I did. And so in college is when I first really started paying attention to my appearance and what makes me different physically, right? Because there are some differences physically. So like typically I have a broader nose, more rounded. The main feature would be my eyes, right? So that why would each of people have smaller eyes or why are they more almond shaped? And just because of the biology where the eyeballs push forward in the eye socket, so it doesn't allow for the eyelid to like go into the eyelid. And so that's what makes it an Asian look. In fact, I tell people this, I'm like, okay, if I were to put my hand right here, I actually run into my eyelids and not my nose. So it's always hard to wear glasses too, because Asian people have a hard time wearing glasses. But that's how part of the physical appearance and understanding my physical difference, which is not necessarily better or worse than anyone else. So since I was away from home, I wanted to start exploring more deeply about who I was. So I wanted to think about, okay, I am a Chinese American person, Chinese American woman. Let's start thinking about how to make work that depicts it, right? But I didn't want to be kind of corny or cheesy or predictable. And of course, as a creative person, I want to make something new that no one else has done, which is always hard to do, right? If you're a musician or if you are an artist. But I also wanted something that was very uniquely tied into who I was. So there was a lot of things to think about, right? So I have this whole idea of this mixed ethnicity and heritage. So I do have a very Chinese physical appearance. I do have strong ties to growing up in a Chinese family, which is, I think, different than other people's experiences. It reminded me of when I met my husband. He was not sure what kind of voice was going to come out of my mouth in terms of what the accent would be there. Because we also had lots of international students at the school. And so, but me growing up Chinese American, I did not necessarily connect to the foreign exchange student that came, born in China or born in whatever country and coming to the United States, because they had a different background and upbringing. Because I still really feel like I'm very American, like I am totally all in with being American, but I also have this other layer of who I am. And then I asked myself, well, am I being Chinese enough? So sometimes it's that question of, am I being Chinese enough? Or am I being too Chinese? People ask me questions about China. I don't know everything about China, but I'll try my best. But it's different in terms of like expectations and perceptions, right? And I think there's lots of, when I talk about identity, I think there are people that are mixed race or people that are immigrants. There's these different experiences in terms of like what ties in identity. And the one that's more easy to see is if you have a variation in the physical appearance. But then I ask myself, am I embracing too much of this, too much of that? And then if you take a look at it, so this is a picture of me, right? But there's also this whole idea of the Chinese stereotype or the trope, and what do I question about that? Right? So someone has this quote talking about how the Chinese woman is soft and demure. They show great inner strength and tolerance and perseverance, but yet they're not going to be too loud and too loudmouth or too quiet. I remember when I first moved to Arkansas, we had a neighbor who was a very nice guy. Still really, you see him at Walmart all the time. But I think to some extent he was really a little bit disappointed. I wasn't more kind of a loud Asian, right? Like for those of you who watch King of the Hill, you've got Khan's wife Min. She's very excitable. She's very loud. But he was disappointed that I am a little bit more quiet and I wasn't that idea of the Laotian, which is not necessarily Chinese, right, person, right? So once again, it's just more about, it's not necessarily right or wrong, but these are just experiences that I was aware of that makes me think, okay, well, I must be different, or, okay, maybe I'm blending in. In addition to that, thinking about how do I make this work Chinese? I didn't want to do the typical stuff. So this is stuff I would see growing up, right? So you've got the dragon on the left, and you've got this beautiful landscape of these rocks in China. I didn't necessarily connect to these two symbols very much. It didn't feel very troubling of who I was. So one thing that made me think as well about kind of the whole idea of identity is kind of the opposite direction. So we had gone to visit family in Hong Kong. So that's where my family, they worked for China, but they ended up moving to Hong Kong. And it was still under British rule at the time. And so I visited, but I was very Americanized, right? So even though I grew up in a house where Chinese was spoken, the more I went to school, the less Chinese I would speak. Although we have a mixture, right? You've ever heard Spanglish? So we have some kind of Chinese version where my mom will talk to me in Chinese, I will talk back to her in English, and it all works out somehow. And sometimes I'll speak in Chinese, but that's how we existed. And so by going to, so I was in fourth grade, very much involved in American culture. And they spoke a lot of actually English in Hong Kong as well, kind of a mixture of the two. And I had a relative, I'm not even sure who she is, but I remember we had spent a few days there, and we were going up in the elevator, and she leaned over to me and said, "You are not Chinese because you don't speak Chinese." And it was like an arrow to my heart. I was like, what? I'm not Chinese because I don't speak Chinese. And so that's what I'm talking about, like these moments of clarity. Like these things happen in my life, but I don't realize what impact it's going to have later on, right? And so, but it was something that was pretty intense. Because I would eat Chinese food, I would live in a Chinese family, but yet in her eyes, because I couldn't have the language, I wasn't Chinese. So that's like a question of another culture, right? Where someone is maybe too black, or not black enough, or too Chinese, or not Chinese enough. So it's really about perception or expectations of who I am. And so my children, my husband's in Bagwell, we love very much. But my children are biracial. So they are also dealing with this whole idea of identity as well, because one is more Asian looking, one is more white, has lighter skin, and at times she's been in a situation where she has spoken up about something that maybe was a little questionable with what's saying, and they all remember like, oh, well, I forgot all of your Chinese. And so it's these experiences that connect us in terms of like, how do I want to move forward? What I really liked during my research is finding Chinese paper cut. It doesn't necessarily have the same look as this, because it's much more graphic, and my background is in printmaking or relief work. So this one has a real crispness to the appearance, but it has enough of a simplified style that is kind of funky and folky and has, I think, a really appealing visual look for me. And I felt like this was the missing piece of the puzzle of who I was. So even though I didn't grow up with this in my household, finding it really made me connect to like, hey, that's the Chinese part of the art that I really like. And maybe I can see how I can incorporate it into my own art. And plus I also like the whole idea of these symbols because there's a lot of superstition, ritual, folklore, where you have to make decisions. It's kind of like, if you're on a baseball team or if you have these different superstitions, I know that when growing up, my grandmother told me that I couldn't put these barrettes in my hair because they were blue, because they were a certain color. And you can only put certain colors in your hair. So even though I had a whole thing of barrettes, different colors, I could only wear the red ones and the brown ones and even the black ones. But everything that made pink, but everything else was off limits. And so to some extent, I still kind of do that now. Like, oh, I'm just going to get these brown hair ties, or these red hair ties, and put them in to my hair. Because it's kind of that whole idea of connected to family traditions or heritage, or to some extent, maybe just trying to be, if you should, well, you don't want to, you know, have any problems with the world of superstition, that have that blue clip that might change. Another aspect that and so these are also the Chinese zodiac animals, really like that book. Another aspect that I really tied to was the whole idea of the clothing or the textiles, the different garments that they wore. And so this is not necessarily stuff that you would see in the United States, but we would have family that was still living in Hong Kong, and they would pack up like care packages of boxes. And so it would include food, it would include different candies, and they would also include VHS tapes of Chinese programming. Because unless you wanted to get Chinese programming, you had to get a huge satellite dish, and it was much difficult to get. And now it's like so easy. It's like the satellite dish you have at home, we can get any station you want, and they can watch whatever they want. But at that time, living not on the East or West Coast, you were just watching the TV show. In fact, cable was amazing. You know, going from like 3 channels to having 20 channels was an amazing upgrade. So these care packages, I like to call them like boxes of Chineseness that got sent from Hong Kong, right? So I put more Chineseness coming my way. So you would have different foods that you couldn't get, because also at the time, it was hard to find any Asian grocery store. Now, in big enough cities, you can go and get things. You can go get things at Walmart now. You can get your seaweed, and you can get your different sauces and things like that. But it was almost like there was a package of like food, clothing, and videotapes. So they would pop these videos in, and then we could watch these Chinese opera shows, right? Or else I never would have seen it. And I don't know if anyone has really watched any of these. They have a very distinctive singing style that is, you wonder if they're screeching or what's going on. But I really love the visual of it, right? So you have these very elaborate headdresses, you've got very distinctive makeup, reminds me a little bit of even like the whole idea of Shakespearean theater, where the person underneath, you don't know anything about them, but you put on this costume and this makeup, and they can transform into anything. And I would imagine that a lot of the actors were all male, but one is going to be painted as the female, and one is going to be painted as the male. I also like this imagery here in terms of the courtyard maidens or the elite emperors or rulers, and having that look to it. Because it also, once again, kind of captures the whole idea of the physical look of Chineseness, plus it has connection to femininity. So this is one of the pieces I did in graduate school, where I combined everything together, right? So I got the paper cut, which is around the outside here, which I used a design that I saw. So it has the crane and the phoenix in the corner. And then this is an actual picture of me, but I went ahead and applied my Chineseness, even though I'm very Chinese on top of it. And so it's a mixture of the makeup and the clothing. And of course, I have never dressed in this way ever. I've only dressed this way in my artwork. I do have some Chinese clothes. I call this Oriental Princess because of another experience that I had. Back in the day, we'd go out to the bar, the dance club, and I was dressed up like a typical American. In fact, I was called the preppy schoolgirl kind of look, where you got the little plaid skirt and like this coordinating shirt. And so I was like, whoa, what did he just call me? Because I wasn't in that appearance, but it was that kind of that connection of the physical appearance. So like I said, it's not necessarily bad, but it's not, it's different, right? In terms of being awareness of who I am. But I guess I took back that phrase, and so I'm like, I am the Oriental Princess in this artwork. Which, if you're talking about political correctness or phrasing, you address things as Oriental when you address people as Asian, right? So that's the Oriental rug, and that's an Asian person. And because I didn't realize this when I was making this piece, but it does have the phoenix here, which are representations of like the feminine form in a lot of Asian art. So you've got the dragon, which is the masculine, and then you've got the phoenix, which is the female. So the next step would be to kind of push it even more, the whole idea of physical representation. And so I came up with the phrase cross-cultural identity. And so I have what I call the American Tammy, very yellow skin, to represent the whole idea of Chineseness. But to some people, I even had someone tell me it's like a Simpsons character, right? Because I have that yellow skin. But then there's also the Chinese Tammy, which is over here with the makeup covering it, which necessarily, like I said before, is not. Could be anyone underneath there, male or female, Chinese or not Chinese, because you're covering up and making yourself into that appearance. This is very inspired by pop art, so you got the design, I don't care, I'd rather sink, the woman that's so upset, apparently it's a kind of relationship. And what I thought was interesting between this look, which has still more kind of some differences in shading, trying to be more realistic. This one becomes much more flat and much more into pop art, which I didn't think I would do. And then this has the lattice work in the background, kind of dividing this version of Tammy versus that version of Tammy, and which I can start seeing in my later work coming about. So graduate school is done, go on to get a job, become a mother. And so I included this piece because my son was born. Actually, my son just graduated high school, so this is a long time ago when I made this piece. But this one is called Printmaking, and a lot of artwork, I've seen some artwork where you've got essentially a little baby boy riding a fish. So I did my version of my son on a fish. And it's because it's full of different symbols. It is tied into, so progeny means someone that is a child of the Lord, your offspring. But this one has the different symbols that represent happiness, wealth, and prosperity. So that's what that whole idea of superstition comes back in, to where, okay, I'm going to include this in my artwork because maybe I'm going to go ahead and apply that to myself or apply that to my situation because it's not going to hurt to go ahead and put that in there. So you've got the different auspicious meanings. So you've got the baby here, which is happiness and longevity. You've got the fish, which is representative of abundance and wealth. And then even the peach shape, which is on the outside here, is depictive of long life. So it's a very simple image of a person, a baby with a fish, but it's loaded with different symbols to try to apply these different messages. What I really liked about the Chinese paper cut is that it was flexible enough where I could use these different symbols and kind of pick and choose what I wanted to include and what I didn't want to include, and then still have the look of the printmaking. And I guess a little bit about Chinese paper cut. It was created in the 6th century BC, and it was a way for people to decorate their homes with essentially very inexpensive material, paper, and you could cut them out into like these little stacks, and you could could celebrate whatever was happening, whatever festival, whatever holiday, whatever celebration, like a child being born or marriage, and you would cut out these different images, and then you would actually paste them onto the windows. And at that time, the windows were essentially openings with paper over them. So if you put them onto the paper, you could decorate the house without blocking the light from coming in inside. And then once you were done with whatever you were celebrating, you just rip off all the paper, put down the appropriate, and then you could put the decoration on that way. So that was a really great way of having a decoration, but that wasn't something that was so permanent. So the next step, another child piece is I made the step in combining real and flat space. So you saw that I did do the self-portrait of myself. So I have a portrait of my son and I right here. But I went ahead and thought, well, instead of trying to cut these into linoleum to print, why don't I just go ahead and cut the paper? Like what they did with the X. So this one I combined the two things. Kind of, so like I said, it's a kind of the real world, but then you've got the flat world. And almost maybe that layer of the world where superstition lives, right? And so it's kind of laying that on top. And I have different symbols, so you can see I got right here, I got hearts in the corners, talking about the love between a mother and a child. I have these flowers, which represent different femininity. And then if you take a real close look up here, it's the tiger. And as I did more research about things tied into what you would buy your child, you can buy these little shoes that had tigers or lions on them, because if you put them on your child, it's going to keep away the evil spirits. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. Or you could buy this collar that you could put around your child that was in the shape of a tiger, because then it would keep away evil spirits. So you're kind of fighting evil forces, or you're trying to put luck into yourself. And so I liked that combination of the two. So now we'll go from here to this, which is a little bit of a departure. But this came about when I was doing more kind of traditional. I would only cut out the paper cuts of red, because red was a lucky color in Chinese culture. So like red. In fact, I always had a red car until just recently. When I bought a black car. We always had a red car, and then we always would hang a little red tassel thing off the mirror. And in fact, it's gone to everyone. My husband has one in his car, and my son has one in his car. So kind of, once again, employing the whole idea of luckiness into that space. And I meet with a group of ladies that are also artists, and some of them also teach. And so it's a social group that we meet, but we also will critique each other's artwork. Because I think that's the hardest part, maybe after you get done with school, is finding some other contemporaries that can give you honest feedback about your artwork, without getting a little too snarky with each other, right? Because we talk to each other. I'm also very fortunate that I have my husband, who's also an artist, so we will talk to each other about what's working with the artwork, what's not working. And not having that community is really isolating for a lot of artists, unless they can find your people, right? Because it's always about finding your people. When I went to school, I found my people in the art department. And lots of people find their people in whatever career or major that they're in. And so it's important to try to find your people. So I was glad that we had these people, although we were kind of spread all out. Some of them lived in Little Rock, and we lived in Russellville and Clarksville, and some of them lived in Ozarks. So it was big. It took a concerted effort for us to try to meet up on a regular basis. And then COVID hit, and then it made it a lot more difficult to do. But we met together, and I was showing them some of my artwork. And one of my friends, Sandra, said, why don't you just go ahead and cut into different materials, different papers, or into your prints themselves? And I didn't even think about doing that. I'm like, well, maybe I'll think about it. And so that's how this piece came about. So this is one of my prints. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see there's some imagery printed onto here. It's a different color, so I went ahead and cut into it. And then I took it to the next step. Instead of just physical representation of me, I went ahead and put some of the patterns and the designs onto my physical appearance. So you can see it's kind of changing in terms of, you can see it's a person, but it's kind of hard to see what's going on. And I think that sometimes is kind of that world I float in, right? It's like, well, you kind of see who I am, but you don't necessarily see who I am because maybe you're just seeing the surface appearance of who I am. And placing down the red paper in the background. All the patterns that I use in my artwork, I try to find from some kind of source. So I'm scouring the internet for things. This was some paper I found at the Chinese grocery store, which I think they use for funerary purposes. I like the patterns, so I went ahead and took that, as well as a flower. Some of the other pieces that I'll show you, I found the pattern on some oyster sauce at the store. It's still Chinese, right? Still had the Chinese packaging, but I'm always looking for different sources of Chinese imagery, whether it be in textiles or things that I find online. Also contemporary, more hot contemporary sources as well, because that's, we live in the contemporary world. And this one's called chrysanthemum because you've got these flowers right here and right there. And so I was very fortunate enough to, this made it into the Delta at the Little Rock Center, Art Center, now it's the AMFA. But so it was a really difficult show to get in, and so I was really happy to have this. And like I talked about, the whole idea of the paper cut is kind of flat but dimensional at the same time. Is it reality or is it mysticism? Sometimes there's a sense of movement. This one I think has more of a sense of stillness, where I'm kind of like sitting there and I'm surrounded by the red, kind of encroaching. So it's a question of like, am I being blocked by the red? Am I being breaking through? Different things like that. This next piece had a more sense of kind of vibration or color choices. As I move along with my artwork, I still want to think about how do I apply color and pattern and layering. So you can see here I've got these waves covering parts of myself, but then it stops right there, and another one that comes forward. So it's more about like, what's coming forward, what's coming back, and how do the colors work. And typically what I'll end up doing is finding an image, then deciding what kind of pattern do I want to put on there, and then what else do I want to add to it. So there's 3 layers here as opposed to 2, and then thinking about what colors are going to work. And then the last step is taking everything here and then trying to put on all the different color papers I have. So I'll put on one, and I'll slip another one under there, because there's a difference. Like what this one has is dark gray, and for the longest time, it wasn't finished, because I put it on a light gray piece of paper, and I wasn't very happy with it. But then I got some dark gray paper, and that finished it up. So sometimes it takes something as simple as that. But this one has black, so it really is everything very neon and very much more, I think, electric to it. But I think that has a different mood than this one, which I think has a more calmness to it. Then I started thinking about scale, because it's like, it's sad to say, but sometimes bigger artwork has a little bit more energy or more presence. So I went ahead and did this piece called Momentum. And so this one, I believe it's probably, I think it's 24 inches, maybe 18 inches. So it's a fairly big piece. And this is paper cut, so I guess to talk a little bit about my process. I have an X-Acto knife, and I cut everything out by hand. Which I guess I forget to mention that. People always say that, well, then they ask me, well, why not just use Cricut or some other machine? I'm like, I don't know, if it would take me longer to probably figure out how to program the image to get it to cut through than for me to just go through and cut it. Although it does take a while. I would say these larger pieces probably take me about 30 hours to complete. But I can't do it all at once, because you can imagine when you're cutting with an X-Acto knife, my finger can only handle so much at a time. Although I got pretty good at getting strengthening on my finger. But so I got this one where I have more sense of movement, and then I have about how much does the red encroach. And then this one actually has decorative paper. So I'm trying to be more specific about what I want to put in and how it's going to fit in. So I think this one has more of a sense of momentum, movement, and what's interesting about it is when I think about, so I made this, and I'm like, well, I'm just making it, this is how it's going to be, but I'm not really thinking about what does this mean. And I just had an epiphany before I put together my show that sometimes these images we're abstract in between that world of being American and Chinese and being, one thing is either hiding me or exposing me, or oftentimes I'll have things that tie in with water or wind, and I don't swim very well, so it's kind of dangerous. Like if you're flying in the air, obviously I don't fly myself, but I'm flying in the air, it's kind of a dangerous situation. So there's a level of uncomfortableness, but yet awareness of the space. Or if I'm in the water, I definitely would be very uncomfortable because I can't swim very well. So it really does talk to my identity as a Chinese American person. So I have some newer pieces. This one has a back view. You can see there's much more of a sense of movement. And then making very specific decisions. So with this one, it almost seemed as if I was like coming up, rising from someplace. And so I included these water lilies or lotus flowers rising up with me. So instead of this sense of growth, they're called coming into being. We're almost like emerging like the Venus from the waters. But yet, can you tell it's me because it's in the back view? And this one's a smaller one. I included this one, Splendor, because of the whole idea of which it was interesting, someone was talking about the halo around them. So this is like a halo piece, right? So I've got, these are peacock feathers, right? And so these are, what's interesting is it's peacock feathers, but that's kind of male peacock feathers because they're the ones that are all fancy, but I went ahead and put them on here. And I had cut out the space first, which has a lot of purples. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, what color is going to complement this? And so I went ahead with the yellow, and then I decided to place that there. So it has a very much kind of like ties into religious iconography, or like the halo, or the nimbus. And it also ties into, I think, coaster art. Kind of reminds me of almost like Hispanic depictions of that culture. And you can see that, actually, this is the pattern that comes from the oyster sauce. So, which is, I scour the Chinese grocery store all the time. Okay, what can I find here? It's still Chinese, but it's a different type of interpretation of it. And I think I've got a new part of my artwork is called, these are my Superstition Series, even though I have lots of superstitious symbols and things like that. But so this is a self-portrait of me, but instead of seeing my face, I cut out these different animals, or these different things. So this one is tigress, because I am the year of the tiger. And plus the tiger is a fierce, if you can read that, it's a fierce commander-like person, which I don't know if I'm necessarily that way. But I probably am, to some extent, forced to be in that situation, especially as being a teacher. But I like that use of the symbol. And then here, this was called Beautiful Snake, because once again, going back to the whole idea of the stereotype of like the dragon lady, or the woman in Chinese culture, someone who's alluring, but yet she might bite you back, or she might be a snake. So watch out. But I like the symbols of kind of placing them on the face, so we're not seeing the face anymore, but you're seeing that superstition mythology that comes forward. And then I also include clouds because they are auspicious symbols. And the reason why the clouds are auspicious is it's a connection between earth and heaven. And they symbolize celestial realm, or like the gods who ride in on the clouds. And so talking about different worlds of what's being lucky or not. So I'm continuing this series as well. And so I'm wrapping up my talk here with a piece that I did in graduate school. It says, "Thank you, come again." And the reason why I really like this symbol, I have done some artwork with it, is that my parents worked at a Chinese American restaurant in South Dakota. So that was a place where you could get egg foo young and a burger and a chocolate shake. But this is South Dakota, back in the 70s, so they would get the bar crowd coming out, and so they would either want to have some Chinese food or some American food. So I thought this was a perfect symbol for who I am, because for a long time, we went to Chinese restaurants, that's the only way they would pack the food, right? Now they have a styrofoam, but that's very Chinese. And during Thanksgiving and different kind of holidays like that, they would actually make turkey and have mashed potatoes and stuffing and dressing. And so we would eat that, and they would put it in these packages. So you probably have never had mashed potatoes in these containers, but I did. And I guess another layer of this is whatever was put into these boxes represented how my family had sustenance and would have food. Right? Because of these boxes, it allowed my family to be successful in the United States. So when I talk about, I guess, back to a little bit of art identity, I try to find personalized images that really connect to me and how we connect to different instances in my life. And so that's, when I talk to my students, I'm trying to get them to find something that's kind of personal and tied into themselves, that they can feel really confident with their artwork. All right, well, thank you so much.
When you were talking about your layering of the paper that you were cutting, is that kind of an intuitive decision when you're in the studio of layering these paper cuts over top of one another, of like obscuring the image under, or how does that process happen? Is it just you're feeling it out, or do you have an idea in mind?
Well, so I usually start off by taking a lot of pictures of myself, or having my husband take pictures of me, and so trying to find a pose. Something I didn't show a lot of this when I started incorporating more hands, in terms of kind of to show different emotions, but it's thinking about, okay, is it going to be, am I looking at the camera, am I looking away, finding a very interesting pose. Then from there, it's thinking about what's the pattern. So this one has more of a hazy, smoky pattern, whereas this one has these waves right here, and then this one has, there's the haze again, and then this one has the cloud. So I was thinking about, okay, what pattern works with the image that I have, in terms of how delicate is it cut, how much do I want to fill up, how little do I want to fill up, and then even from there, finding the right paper that I want to use. Then from there, it's thinking about, okay, what's the next step? Well, I'm going to use this pattern here, and thinking, okay, what color is going to work with that too? So this one in particular, since I started out with the purple paper, I went ahead and used this print that was this brown on yellow, because I thought the yellow and the purple are complementary colors, so they're going to work well with each other. And then I always have the red in the background. But even then, I had to think about, well, how crowded or how thin is it going to be? And so this one is very open, whereas this one is a lot, very intricate, and has a lot of little parts to it. And so I thought this worked well with this, or you can see I have little gaps here and there, whereas this one I think is much more open, but it's a lot more short. So it's kind of I made one decision, and then kind of reacts to the next, and then it reacts to the next, and then I finally put them all together. And so what I do here is, where these meet here, I actually line it up, and I cut it out, and I glue it together. So it's very tedious. I guess all my artwork is very tedious. I just like it a lot. After I'm done with that, then I go ahead and put the different colors in. Okay, it's going to be brown, it's going to be gray, it's going to be whatever colors. And so you can see this one has more, I think, a pinkish tone. This one more kind of tan, obviously black, and so on, so far and so forth like that. Yes?
How long did it take you to learn how to make such clean and accurate cuts with paper cut?
I don't know, I guess it's with the printmaking, if you've done printmaking, there's a technique called relief, where you can use linoleum or wood, and so you have these gouges that you carve out. So it's like making a stamp, and then you're just inking up the top surface and then printing on that. And so I guess the paper cuts, you can need like the next step. So it takes lots of X-Acto knives, and a self-healing mat is what really saves you. And then I guess I just must like, I equate this to people that like to knit, because I can't imagine how people would knit and make things look so nice, because mine would be like all crazy. But I guess for me, I really like the whole idea of cutting my hand. And I was telling someone else too, they really see the geometry in here, but if you really take a close look, they're not completely the same thickness. But I like that because there's a human touch to the making of the art, because otherwise I can just get a machine to do it for me. And then when I'm cutting, sometimes I'll make a decision like, I don't really want that in there, so I'll just cut it out, instead of keeping everything in there. So I like, even though it's a very organized, structured method of making art, there still is a level of spontaneity where I can make changes along the way. Yes?
If you make a mistake, is it easy to maybe?
Well, I have cut through some paper, I've torn some paper, like I've tried cutting on these different papers. There was this one paper that was very delicate, and if I didn't have a sharp enough knife, it would rip. So then I cut a little tiny piece of paper, get some glue on it, and I'm just like getting it on there, and then try to glue it together. So there are some glue pieces, but I try to make it look like I haven't made a mistake. Or that's the way I want it.
What are the sizes of some of these pieces? How do you make
Yes,
these?
so this one, I think these are 16 by 20, or 20 by 16, and then this one is, I think, 24 by maybe 21. These new ones are 21 inches by 28, so those are my biggest ones. I will probably try to do some bigger things, but these take so long. It takes me at least a month or two just try to make them, but I ended up having to speed up my process because I had the solo show bearing down on me, so I was like, okay, as my husband can attest, there was lots of cutting in the living room as I was getting towards this show. And then this was another 60 by 20, so I have made a bigger piece, but they're not necessarily as intricate, but that's the size range for now. Yes?
Yes, you talk a lot about your Asian identity in your presentation. I wonder, when you travel, do you find yourself attracted to the Asian parts of town? When you go to a new city or whatever, do you seek out that community when you go from place to place?
I think it depends on where we're going, but I know that there is a Chinatown, sometimes we'll go there. What's funny is actually what my husband and I seek out is the art museum, where we go like, oh, okay, we're in New Orleans, let's see what art museum is here. We go to different places. But I do like to go check out, we do go to Little Rock a lot and go to the Chinese grocery store. Although I question myself, if I went back to China now, how would I feel being there? Because like, there's all these Chinese people, and I'm not used to having all these Chinese people around me.
On your work progeny, you were sharing about how I was thinking, oh look, she's made a heart around him, and then you said this is the peach.
Yeah.
Are there very many symbols that can be represented, whether it seemed through my eyes as a Texan for many years, I'm saying American and Chinese that you use?
I think so. I would say with that one, the whole idea of the peach, but then I could see it also being the heart as well. I think maybe subconsciously I'm trying to do things that both fit into both worlds, right? Because like I said, I really am very much into my Chinese heritage. When we grew up, I had a grandmother that lived with us all the time. That's a very Chinese thing. And so when I was pregnant with my second child, my parents were like ready to retire and help us out and moved to Russellville, Arkansas from San Francisco. And my husband was the one that said, why don't they just move in with us? We'll all live together. And that was oxtail and some of these other foods that necessarily don't necessarily eat in American culture. And also being able to pass down stories and different recipes and things like that. Yes?
Well, thank you for coming back to see us in Texarkana. I love your exploration of culture and identity and location, symbolism, color, and you mentioned some of the subconscious possible interpretations of your symbols and color. And I was just laughing at your love of red, considering what state you're in. So is it both China and Arkansas? Love of red.
It could, well, I mean, I did a series, and I don't have a picture of it, but I was talking about using the color, and so I would use the flag of the United States, and so I would have, the American side would have the red, white, and blue, but then the Chinese side would have the red and yellow, and then the red was always the thing that was in common, right? And so, I don't know, red is very important, I guess, in my world, and in my art as well, but it's also very, I would say, universal though too, because if you look at how red is used in all different cultures, so I think sometimes we share things even though we don't realize it, and sometimes we use it to divide ourselves when we don't necessarily have to.
All right, Tammy Harrington, everyone.
All right, thanks.